Well, you might say that if life arose in the absence of intelligence as merely the product of natural processes, we'd expect it to rise somewhat slowly and start simply. I think we all know that nature doesn't create complexity very quickly. It happens over a long period of time as is standard materialistic, naturalistic, and evolutionary theories. But if life arose as the product of intelligence, we'd expect a more deliberate act of creation. And in this case, we'd find complexity rising quite rapidly and explosively on the scene. That's what intelligence does. That's the mark of intelligence. Complexity arising spontaneously as a deliberate act of creation. These are very different scenarios. What do we actually find in the fossil record? What we find is that the first organisms in the fossil record were actually highly complex, with structures like spines, eyes, digestive systems, and organs. Not simple organisms. What do these look like? We have a couple here. Meet my friends, Opabinia, Morella splendens, Anomelocaris, and Hallucigenia sparsa. Say that last one with me. Hallucigenia sparsa. These guys are cute. I want one. Are these simple life forms? No, you can see complex structures. You see eyes, you see limbs, you see spines. There are digestive systems inside these. These are not simple life forms. But the problem gets even worse. You see, they rise quite rapidly on the scene. It's been calculated that if life on planet Earth were divided into a 24-hour clock, the history of life on Earth, we'd find 20 of the 26 major animal types arising in just 1 minute of that 24-hour clock. In other words, it's just saying that a great diversity arises on the scene very rapidly in the history of life on planet Earth. So what have we found so far? Life arrives quite rapidly on the scene, already complex and diverse. And there are implications of this. This is being talked about and admitted by scientists, as explained by geologist Sir Roderick Impey Murchison. The earliest signs of living things, announcing as they do a high complexity of organization, entirely excludes the hypothesis of a transmutation from lower to higher grades of being. These are the first organisms, and they're already complex. The fossil record doesn't show them coming from anything below them that's simpler. We saw that these are incredibly complex organisms. To say that these came about by natural processes, these being generation one of life on planet Earth, is like saying a tornado went through a junkyard and put together an aircraft. Does natural processes, do they put together complexity of this degree? But it's actually worse than that. It's like saying a tornado went through a junkyard and created an airplane, a tank, a muscle car, a motorcycle, and a helicopter, because we have diversity from the start. Are natural processes capable of that? Now, you might say, if this is the case, then how do people assume that life is the product of natural processes? Why is that even taken seriously? Why is it so mainstream? Well, a lot of it has to do with presuppositions and worldview that gets taken into the discussion. But basically, if someone wants life to be the product of merely naturalistic processes, then you're going to assume that happened, and then you're going to group the data into a format that reflects that. So one is going to assume that these aren't the first organisms, because that would be inexplicable to their theory. In other words, they're assuming that there were ancestors. These aren't actually the first ones. These are much later. These are descendants. In other words, they're looking for ancestral precursors. Now, like I said earlier, these are the first ones we find. We don't have ancestral precursors. So then how do people do this? Well, they give what is called an artifact theory. Basically a fancy way of saying it's an excuse for why we probably shouldn't expect to find these fossilized ancestors. They give reasons for why they're not there, and maybe we shouldn't expect them to be there to begin with. And just a brief thing, there's no such thing as unavailable evidence. Evidence can be defined as the available information or data pointing to a belief or proposition being true or accurate. To say that there's evidence out there that we can't find or shouldn't expect to find seems to be a contradiction in terms, but that's another discussion. Let's just talk about 4 artifact theories. Some say that due to tectonic movement, perhaps these fossils did exist, but they're displaced into the sea, which is why we don't find them below the other layer fossils that we actually do have. But after decades of drilling in the sea and looking for them, we still haven't found any, so many are doubting this theory. Next, some say that perhaps these ancestors were too small to be fossilized. But size doesn't appear to be an issue. We even have fossilized bacteria. And second, you'd expect to find progression. It doesn't go small to large in one generation. You should expect to find some ancestors, but we don't. This one is doubted as well. Third, some might say that perhaps the ancestors were too soft to be fossilized. Okay, that might make sense. Actually, it doesn't. We even have fossilized algae. Further, it turns out that 95% of our fossilized specimens actually are soft-bodied or at least thin-skeleton. So softness doesn't appear to be an issue for fossilization. And lastly, you'd expect to find progression once again. It doesn't go soft to hard. in one generation. You'd expect to find some fossilized organisms with some hard body parts, but we don't. And lastly, some say that perhaps the sedimentation of the area was actually not ideal for fossil preservation. This is one of the main ones held to. But actually, geologists have determined that the sedimentation of the area was even more ideal for fossil preservation. What does that mean? We should expect to find even more fossilized organisms of this era than of the descendants we do have. What do we find? It's just the opposite. We don't find any. You expect to find more than what we have, but we don't find any. So this one is doubted as well. So because these theories don't hold up, there's no reason to think that these fossilized organisms existed. And if that's the case, then these organisms we saw a minute ago truly are generation one of what we find in the fossil record of life on planet Earth. And this is a problem that's been run into that's admitted by many paleontologists, as explained by Niles Eldredge. When we do see the introduction of evolutionary novelty, it usually shows up with a bang, and often with no firm evidence the fossils did not evolve elsewhere. Evolution cannot forever be going on somewhere else. Yet that's how the fossil record has struck many a forlorn paleontologist looking to learn something about evolution. So what is the picture of life that we find? Well, take a look at this. This is an oversimplified version of a tree of life. You see here, in the branches you find fossilized organisms that we do find, diversification happening within those major types. But where they allegedly combine, we have what is called a missing link. Now, based on what we saw, there's probably good reason to think that those links didn't exist. If they did, we expect to find them, and in even greater numbers in the fossils than what we do have of the alleged descendants. But what happens if we just hold on to what we do have? What's the picture of life's history that we do find? That look more like this. See, we would find life coming into existence already complex and diverse, isolated within major kinds. And then, of course, diversification does happen within those kinds. That's the picture we get. Life arrives complex and diverse on the scene quite rapidly.